Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining Second Nature today for our webinar. We are still in Higher Ed Edition. My name is Michelle Medea, Director of Education and Partnerships with Second Nature, and we're delighted to have you with us this afternoon. Next slide. I'd like to give a quick word of thanks to all of our corporate partners for their support of Second Nature and the Climate Leadership Network. And some housekeeping items: this webinar will be recorded, and the recording and slides will be sent to all registrants in the days following the webinar. We'll also save some time for Q&A session at the end, and you can submit questions at any time during the broadcast using the questions function on your GoToWebinar panel. Next slide. Today we'll be joined by three presenters. I want to introduce them quickly before we get started. Tim Carter will go first. He's been president of Second Nature for almost 3 years. Prior to this, he was the founding director of Butler University's Center for Urban Ecology and was on the faculty at the University of Georgia, where his work focused on the intersection between urbanization and environmental management through studies of designer ecosystems, sustainable development, environmental policy, and climate change impacts on coastal areas. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Diane Harrison. She began her appointment as president of California State University Northridge in June 2012. Prior to her appointment there, she served as president of California State University Monterey Bay since 2006, and for nearly 30 years worked at Florida State University, where she began as a faculty member and served in various administrative roles, including vice president for academic quality and external programs. Very importantly for us, she also chairs the Climate Leadership Steering Committee for the President's Climate Leadership Commitments, and we're grateful for her service. We're also joined by Marty Spitzer. He's the Senior Director for Climate and Renewable Energy at the World Wildlife Fund and has been with that organization for more than 6 years. Prior to WWF, he worked at the Center for Clean Air Policy and has held positions at the John Hines Center for Economics and the Environment on Capitol Hill and in past administrations. We're delighted to have all three of them with us today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tim. Next slide.
Let's go back one. Great, thanks, Michelle. Thanks everybody for hopping on this webinar. I know it's a middle of the day and probably over your lunch break, so hopefully you can be well fed as you listen. The goal today is to really think about and understand the next steps associated with this really transformative initiative that has been accelerated by some of the federal action that we've seen, and but really builds upon decades of history of climate action work that many of you have been doing, and many of our partners have been doing. And I do just want to frame this in the first few slides with a bit of understanding about what it is we're talking about. There's a series of pledges and MOUs and statements and commitments that have been in existence for a long time, and really many of them are all in the same direction. There's a goal of aggressive climate action attached to them, and we've actually been a part of this as well. And it's also easy to get overwhelmed on what does the next commitment look like, or what does the next pledge look like. So our goal today is really to provide some clarity around how the We Are Still In initiative relates to the past work that many of you are involved with, and specifically how higher ed as a sector can contribute and accelerate the work of this cross-sectoral initiative. It's an important moment in time for our country. We all know that, on a variety of levels, some of which are related very personally to things that we care about, and some of which are go beyond our personal both influence and impact. We know that our country's action, some of us feel very connected to, and the international community, especially around climate work, many of the international players are really looking to subnational actors as really critical in advancing the United States' climate progress. And so we want to be clear about, within the U.S., how does this sector, the higher education sector, fit? Before we get there, though, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about some context. So if you go to the next slide. Wait for it to shift here. So our framework that we've operated under at Second Nature is really thinking about networks, and just wanted to introduce some quick basic network language that helps provide some conceptual framing for collective action. This is really lifted from this book, Connecting to Change the World by Pete Plastrick and others. And in that book, they identify 3 different types of networks. It's really helpful, I think, to use these terms just so we're all on the same page. Connectivity networks are really what many of us are a part of. Many of you are part of an affinity group within your higher ed institution, or you have colleagues that work at other institutions that share some maybe disciplinary field that you're in. And many times you come together and you share ideas and you have relational capital that you build with these friends and colleagues. And the density of the connections between these nodes and connection networks and connectivity networks are really valuable. The thicker those connections are, the better these connectivity networks function. A step beyond that, maybe not in a positive or negative way, just a different way of thinking about a network is an alignment network. In connectivity, you are loosely aligned because you know people. In an alignment network, the idea is that you actually are sharing a specific goal together. Groups, or we'll use the network language, the networks that have formed around climate action really are these alignment networks. There's usually either a broad or very specific climate goal that everyone is working towards. That's something that we've been a part of running for the past decade. There's this alignment network that I'll talk about in a second. And then a third, and almost maybe a gold standard in terms of network ideas, is this idea of a production network. And this is where it takes alignment a step further. You see actions and activities happening collectively in a way that would not be possible if just the individual actors were acting in isolation. So many of you are part of connectivity. Some of you are part of an alignment network. I think all of us would love to be a part of, especially on this climate action front, a production network where we're doing things and getting things done because we're part of something bigger than ourselves that we could not do if we were acting alone. It feels like we are just acting alone. We're trying to get our own campus goals done, or we're, just trying to get our own work plans done as an individual on a campus. I think what we really want to focus on here is the collective and how we could actually think through this third tier of a production network. And some of the cross-sectoral work is really just an extension of the alignment already been started within our sector. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. It's this third type of network we've been really thinking about and trying to articulate to both signatories within the Climate Leadership Network, as well as others outside. And I think it's really been a helpful framing for establishing some of the resources and programs that we've been working on. Our history is really based on individual campus climate commitments, the president's climate leadership commitments. This is where presidents and chancellors commit to carbon neutrality or resilience. And it sets the campus on a series of steps to meet those goals. And we have over 600 schools that have been part of this. Collectively, though, we aggregate. We don't necessarily do things together that could only be done if campuses were acting together. And so we've tried over the past year or so to initiate a more formalized version of this production or performance, which we're calling Network 2.0. Go to the next slide, please. And so under Network 2.0, when we think about growth, it's no longer just adding signatories or adding people to sign something, but it's really about performance. We want people to actually execute on the goals that they've created. We know the technical support isn't just about meeting the requirements of the commitments that you've made, but actually meeting your goals that you've set up in your climate action plan, which involves, energy efficiency or renewable energy or various forms of performance that you've created yourself. And then solutions, many of you have done some low-hanging fruit, but this interinstitutional collaboration is really necessary in some cases to do some of the large-scale carbon reduction that is scientifically necessary. It's not just a preference; it's actually needed for global health. Lastly, the senior leadership's role is not just to sign, but actually to continue to advocate on behalf of the institution for the climate actions that are needed. And this last one is a really critical role in this cross-sectoral alignment. The We're Still In group actually, from the higher ed side, included specific names of all the presidents. It wasn't just an institutional commitment. It was people from those institutions that could commit on behalf of the institution. And that's a form of public advocacy. It's stepping out in a leadership role in a way that's really powerful. So next slide. So it's with this kind of that background and performance mindset that we can view the evolution of these, some ways, the evolution of the initiatives outside of the sector. In 2006, this is when the climate commitments were launched. It took roughly 5 years to really build a network, a true network in any sort of alignment sense, where we had a critical mass. Once that had been created, then it really was starting to shift towards not just aggregated progress, but could there be collective progress? And so then the network was actually beginning to be recognized. In 2015, we worked very closely with the White House on the American Campuses Act on Climate Pledge. This was leading up to the Paris talks. About over 70% actually of the campuses that were part of that pledge are actually from the Climate Leadership Network. So there was a clear extension of that initial work into this international arena. And that pledge was actually done in coordination with the American Businesses Act on Climate Pledge. So this is one of the early, maybe not the only early, but one of the early ways in which we had a business and campus alignment. Then the election happened and Paris happened. So not in that order. That changed the context under which people were working. And we needed to understand then, particularly around the election, how we would continue to aggressively pursue climate action if the federal context really changed. And so we were building upon those past few steps, and in 2016 initiated, we didn't initiate, but this effort had been initiated that higher education could join through the Low Carbon USA banner. Marty can speak more to this, but basically business had a statement that they had created encouraging the incoming administration at the time to really focus on or understand the importance of climate in the health of the country. And so we helped lead a higher ed version of that then was aligned under this Low Carbon USA umbrella. So this is the first time that this lived, business and campus higher education lived under a similar framework. We used similar language and we aligned it under a similar website. There's a lot of shared concepts in both of those statements. Then we obviously entered into a phase that was really challenging, where we began to hear that there was, the new administration was established and there wasn't an appetite necessarily for staying in the Paris Agreement. And so because of this history, because of the alignment with business, because of the past work we had done with WWF as part of Low Carbon USA, we were able to be really a representative of higher education and thinking through what a response to any actually federal action around the Paris Agreement would look like. And so we started discussing this response that eventually became We Are Still In. The unique thing about We Are Still In, again, Marty will talk more about this, is that it is cross-sectoral by definition. It's not just aligned with another sector, but we as higher ed institutions are actually under the same, committed to the same statement as the business community, as the mayors that are part of it, and as the governors. This is truly cross-sectoral, not just alignment of a sector. And it, like we were saying, builds off of past work, and each of the sectors really brings some complementary strengths, which I'll talk about now. So next slide. So the first piece of what is next for higher education is really to understand what are higher education strengths as part of this cross-sectoral group. Now I've identified three here and one on the next slide. But of course, people I'm sure can think of more. First is really the intellectual capital that's brought to bear by U.S. higher ed institutions. There's direct research. There's research into the coalition itself. What is the contribution that these institutions across all the sectors can make? Tons of application of research that can go there. Additionally, there is actually research into the climate strategies and solutions that are possible given the places that institutions are located in, the alignment with business, mayor, and governor support in those places. We see this as a huge opportunity, not just as research institutions, R1 institutions, but also as smaller schools, maybe liberal arts schools, that might have a different type of student engagement, maybe more community-based, that could be really interesting to complement more of the technical research side of things. So this intellectual capital is more of an overarching idea, not just technical research. And then the thought is that there's actually alignment with these other sectors in the climate solution policies, and the intellectual resources that higher ed brings to that discussion can be really valuable. We've started to see this actually even before we're still in different states, where the campuses that have made commitments really were able to align the interest of their senior leaders and others with other members of other sectors, and that actually translated into some policies that were really beneficial to everyone involved. Secondly, another strength of higher education is workforce development. Oftentimes, either two-year institutions or the student populations that are actually being trained in these jobs may not specifically be able to align to a citywide or a region-wide initiative, and this actually gives some framing for that, both in terms of curricular and student engagement. Third, higher education is really good at convening. Oftentimes, it's a very trusted entity. Lots of events happen within campuses, and we see this as a strength of higher education within this coalition, that we can bring together actually other sectors who are interested in discussing what the next steps would be, and the higher education institutions can host those events. Specifically, and Marty, I think we'll talk about this too, is the COP23 upcoming. There's both opportunities in Bonn to be a participant, as well as possibly maybe some satellite virtual events that could happen. And I know campuses have extensive experience doing this within other contexts to put on some virtual meetings. Next slide. And then lastly, just this idea of amplifying a very critical message to the rest of the world. This idea that the United States is actually still in on climate, that the sectors are aligned on that. We not only have a central portal, but every one of the institutions, higher education institutions, has extensive opportunities to tell your own story through it. We're actually in the process of collecting your stories, and would love for you to continue to contribute that. A number of you have already done that, but in the next few weeks, there's going to be a new launch of the website in September, and in the process of building the content for that, we want to tell the stories of what campuses are doing around climate action, and Andrea will be taking those. So feel free to reach out to her directly on that. So we want to be able to elevate, and we know campuses are really good at telling interesting stories about what's happening on their campus. It's really inspiring and motivating for others. Next slide. Last thing I'll mention before I turn it over to Diane is that we will have a summit that is really oriented towards this cross-sectoral work. We're the theme of the summit in 2018 is actually crossing sectors, driving solutions, and it's all about how can the intersectoral work of something like WASI be implemented, or we are still in, we call WASI, be implemented at scale, and this will be the first time for higher education institutions to really come together to discuss that, largely at the senior leadership level. So encourage you to put a little placeholder in your calendars for that, February 4th to 6th. Next slide. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context. My intent was to provide some context here before digging into specifics of what, how senior leaders are motivated, which Diane will cover, and then Marty will tackle some of the more specifics from the We Are Still Inside. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Diane now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Tim, and good morning, everyone. It's still morning here in California, so I'd like to begin as chair of the Climate Leadership Network Steering Committee and president of California State University Northridge. I want to talk just for a brief time from a university president's perspective about why our commitments and climate action plans related to carbon reduction and resiliency, excuse me, as well as our participation in We Are Still In, is more important than ever. Presidents and chancellors can bring strong voices and leadership to policy and advocacy efforts for climate action in our campus community connections and in fulfilling our educational mission of preparing the next generation of climate action leaders. As Tim pointed out, we bring intellectual capital from our research capacities and generating climate strategies and solutions that are tested and often piloted on our campuses and as models for dissemination to our communities. As president, I can make a business case. For example, we're saving money, we're being good stewards of resources, but also a very strong educational case. We're preparing global citizens for the 21st century for all of our efforts and leadership. And yes, absolutely, our commitments also provide increased opportunities to strengthen campus community connections. Before I proceed, I do want to point out that I recognize that it is certainly easier in some geographic locations, for example, in California, New York, the state of Washington, and even in some red states, so to speak. It's easier to be more aggressive in our leadership efforts. But I also believe that the options for sometimes what I term more discrete campus leadership are also great. We know the polls are with us. We know that even with the rise of climate change deniers and anti-science individuals, many university presidents and chancellors, including me, believe the time is now for our actions and leveraging the strengths of higher education in our commitments. California State University Northridge, or CSUN, is located in the city of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley. We've had a very long history of sustainability engagement and initiatives. It's one of our 8 strategic priorities for the university, from the campus's recycling center, which was actually established in 1991, to the Green Corps team members who 10 years ago organically developed as a volunteer group who met once a month to help facilitate sustainability progress, and they still meet today. We believe that the backbone of any successful campus sustainability plans are strong campus partnerships, both within the university and with sectors outside of campus, and where such partnerships are empowered to develop and flourish. When campus employees, faculty and staff, and students are given opportunities and a sense of empowerment from campus leadership, many discover career and educational aspirations beyond their belief, all the while meeting or exceeding the university's sustainability goals and making progress on our climate action plan. As you can see on the second slide, we have a 10-year campus sustainability plan that covers 10 areas that you can see on your screen there. I receive as president, annual updates from our working group on our progress in each of these areas. I might also add that we have, proud to say, won several national and state awards in recognition of our efforts. In addition to reporting progress on our campus action plan to Second Nature based on our climate commitments, we've also adopted the City of LA's sustainability plan and will be reporting our progress annually to the city. Given both Governor Jerry Brown's and LA Mayor Eric Garcetti's commitments to climate action, we are perfectly aligned with our state and local officials. In addition to this alignment with elected officials, our climate action plan has enabled us to partner with many other sectors in our community. For example, we have an orange grove on our campus, which annually provides over 18,000 pounds of fruit to local food pantries that would otherwise have gone to waste. We host an Earth Fair, a Water Day, Sustainability Day, and an America Recycles Day for both campus and local communities to attend. We provide energy and water conservation, compost and gardening workshops, both on and off campus throughout our communities. We've partnered with the California Relief Organization on a grant to work with local businesses and schools to plant trees. The trees, of course, are intended to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions locally, as well as improve aesthetics and reduce the heat island effect that, quite frankly, can be brutal in a highly developed, dense urban environment. Currently, we are working with several of our neighborhood councils, a community college partner, and local government representatives to produce a resiliency assessment. This assessment will help us develop a resiliency plan that can be used and replicated throughout our region. On the next slide, you will see a news clip that describes another recent partnership. Last month, one of the Department of Water and Power's large transformers caught on fire and caused a minimum of 12-hour power outages throughout our area, including campus. This fire, unfortunately, as unfortunate as it was, highlighted the issues of deferred infrastructure and the lack of an effective resiliency plan to cope with our aging utilities and growing energy needs. CSUN launched a resiliency project in recognition of the critical role the university plays in a community. During such crises, the university's open spaces will play an important part in emergency coordination. At the same time, the resiliency project will work to map ways in which the university and the community around us can be better protected by long-term infrastructure planning, which promotes better adaptability in the case of natural or human disaster. And I can say in California, we constantly have to be prepared for either of these. A final point, Los Angeles is spending a lot of time and money, as are many cities throughout our country, trying to attract and retain new businesses in the city. We know that large companies are concerned about having high quality living areas for their employees, from affordable single-family homes with good schools to exciting downtown venues with unique apartment opportunities. Affordability, diversity, and quality schools all matter. Establishing a long-term strategy to retain these strengths will create a more resilient city. And we want to participate and intend to participate in all of these efforts in Los Angeles. We also expect that businesses that we do partner with will take seriously and be committed to carbon reduction and resiliency. We consider their commitment in any partnership and in our purchasing and procurement, for example. From a president's perspective, that is good business for us. The synergies that we've been able to create with other sectors have definitely accelerated our work in climate action. So I'm going to stop here and pass the baton over to Marty.
Thank you, President Harrison. That was a great discussion. And actually, as I'm about to transition to my my slides, one of the things that I thought about you were speaking is just imagine what can happen when we take the energy, leadership, and amazing work that's going on at your campus and pull that together with the work that's going on across the country on campuses, along with business, thousands of businesses, hundreds of cities and mayors and counties and governors and more, and we start to talk together and we start to tell our story together. We start to project that globally in the absence of federal leadership. That's ultimately what We Are Still In is going to be. We're at the beginning of that journey, but I think it was just a great way to think about what's happening at a local level and what's going to be possible as we really ramp up this cross-sector effort. So on the next slide, I want to pick up where a little bit of overlap with Tim's description, which I thought was a fantastic history of kind of how we got here. We Are Still In isn't an accident. We Are Still In is an effort now that's in place because of the actions of the Climate Leadership Network on your end, the work many of us were doing on the business community, and many others were doing. And as these networks, and what we've been able to do is build on that. Just one little more background on Low Carbon USA. It turned out that the businesses, when they signed their statements, and originally it was in an ad in the Wall Street Journal back when the Paris Accord was being signed, that's the bullets that they were requesting, what they wanted from the administration in support of a strong Paris outcome, turned out to be almost identical to the things that ended up in the higher ed statement. And credit to Tim and to recognizing the opportunity for the alignment, we were able to bring business and higher ed together last year after the election at a moment when everybody was clamoring for what can we do, what can we say, how can we say it louder and more and in a more effective way. And at WWF, we were looking at opportunities for broadening the scope of what we were doing, and we were also able to pull in a National League of Cities who had its own statement that was very similar. And we were starting to build what was and what could be this cross-sectoral platform for action, not just statement, but action. And then President Trump, in his own way, created the momentum for us to take it to a new level. And as the debate about whether to stay in the Paris Accord or announce to leave was going on, it turned out many other groups were also looking to about what they would do, how would they react. And we literally got over 25 organizations together, WWF, Second Nature, and a large number of other stakeholders across sectors, and put together this single statement that nothing like that had been done before, to say all of us are still in. We still support the Paris Accord. The next slide, just want to just remind everybody, those of you who may not have seen the statement or haven't looked at it in a little while, there's sort of two main things that everyone agreed to. That everyone who signs the statement is pursuing ambitious climate goals, is committing to work together to take forceful action to ensure the U.S. remains a global leader. So what that means is stepping up and saying the U.S. is still going to move forward on its Paris commitments despite the steps for the federal government. And that we're going to remain actively engaged with the international community. And this is what we'll talk a little bit more about COP23 in a minute, but focusing this collective voice into the international sphere, because it turns out that U.S. action, with the government involved or not, is actually critical to helping keep the overall Paris Accord on track. If the rest of the world thinks the U.S. is going to drop the ball, then there's more, and you have the potential for this race to the bottom with others easing up. And so this is not lighthearted. This is serious stuff. And at a moment, we were so proud to be part of and work with him and many of you to make this happen. On the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about the goals that we're going to think about for We Are Still In, which include action-oriented, driving positive solutions-oriented, oh, sorry, I jumped ahead, one slide. Let me just summarize where we are for the moment with the signatories. Apologies for that. When we launched this 3 days after the president announced that we intend to withdraw from Paris, we had 1,200 signatories for the statement. As of earlier, actually that should say August 15th, as of 2 days ago, we have just shy of 2,300. We have 9 state governors, 245 cities and counties, with over 130 million residents when you put it together with the states, 324 institutions of higher education. If any of you are on the call and haven't already signed on, we certainly welcome you to join. This is a huge number, representing a huge number of students and total endowments. And then we have over 1,700 businesses and investors. With about 40 Fortune 500s and almost 200 what we call sort of larger companies, this also includes a huge number of small companies and investors spread across the U.S. And that tells you something about the breadth of interest. And we think that that geographic diversity, and we'll have a map, that pin map that similar to what Tim showed for your statement, we'll have something similar on the new We Are Still In website that'll allow everyone to see where the universities are, but together, it's really going to color in America. So in terms of our next slide, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to drive positive, a solutions-oriented narrative and coordinate our messaging. Help, and this is a very important one about the action part of the platform, is help businesses, cities, higher ed, set and meet more ambitious climate goals. And what we're going to try to do is pull more, so in the higher ed context, is can we get more universities and educational institutions to join the existing initiatives that are there? I don't know if the slide is stuck or on the next slide, if you can. But we want to pull in more new voices and actors into the space. Because the truth is, even with the 2,300 signatories that We Are Still In, that's nowhere near enough to get close to the Paris Accord. So ultimately, what we can do, if we can deliver some coordinated action, buy-in across businesses, cities, and higher ed, locally at international events, we're going to have an impact. On the next slide, I'm going to just summarize the three main objectives, and this is really how we're beginning to organize the activities. The first one is the geographic focus. So imagine this work in Pennsylvania, in Southern California, that can bring together universities, businesses, government leaders. Mayor Garcetti in LA has been a leader in this space as well. There will be opportunities, and we're going to try to create additional platforms and help the different organizations connect with each other so that they can take more action and build more support for climate action at the local level. So this is intended to empower and connect. The second one is to provide confidence in American or U.S. climate leadership to international audiences. So we'll be thinking about coming up, the COP23 is in November, and we'll be looking to create, we're actually going to have a pavilion there. If any of you have ever been to any of the COPs, there are pavilions in the negotiation space and in spaces around the city wherever the negotiations take place that bring people together. The U.S. usually has a pretty big pavilion, the United States government, that many, they stage events in. Well, the U.S. isn't going to have much of a presence. So we have got a pavilion space, and we're going to be using it to feature and showcase action from what we call these non-state actors, universities, businesses, and government leaders, subnational government leaders. And the third one, and this is actually very close to my heart because it's what I do on a day-to-day basis, is helping organizations drive additional commitments and action. One of the things we do is I just, by way of example, we help businesses set science-based goals and join what's now called the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Now, about 300 companies globally have set commitments. can we use the We Are Still In platform to help drive many more companies toward action? Can Second Nature and the university and the higher ed network bring in more institutions? So we're extremely excited about the opportunities. We've never thought systematically about how to do these things cross-sectorally at a local, national, and international way. And so it's an exciting time. We'll be looking for lots of ideas. Tim mentioned this notion that maybe during the COP, some of you may, and your leadership may come to Bonn, but many folks won't actually be there. So while we need some people there, what if we can create some local events and connect them virtually to what's going on? That type of activity could really be powerful and send some very strong messages. I just want to finish up with one of the questions some of you may have is, you know, what exactly is, how is We Are Still In going to operate? It's on the next slide. Just a few thoughts about how we're working with really what amounts to 25 other groups to turn We Are Still into this action platform that we so much want. And in order for that to be successful, it's going to have to be collaborative and consensus driven. It's really important for the voices of, and it says subnational actors, but let's be clear, that's businesses, higher education institutions, governors, mayors, county executives. The NGO role here is behind the scenes, but the most important voice has to be those actors in the real economy who are saying, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it, and building the future solutions. Which takes us to, we're going to be very solutions oriented and message focused. There'll be a lot of communications from a website and joint communications that will be provided to all of the folks participating in We Are Still In, so that when we go out to Facebook, we go out to Twitter, during the COP, we'll be sharing those messages that can be used across many different platforms and across many different sectors. And then ultimately, this will work if everyone understands that this is designed to serve the initiatives and efforts they've already got underway, but to also allow us to do more together in ways that we maybe are just starting to imagine and we'll be able to build over time. So in a way, we're building this We Are Still In airplane as we're flying it. So that has some risks and some challenges, but the starting point has been fantastic. And to be honest, the partnership with Second Nature and Tim has been a tremendous benefit to this whole endeavor. With that, I'm going to stop there and turn it back to you, folks.
Thanks, Marty and President Harrison and Tim. We're going to take a few questions now, and I would encourage everybody to ask through the GoToWebinar question function on your screen if you have some, but I think I have one queued up for just about each of our presenters. First of all, to you, President Harrison, what do you think is a good motivation for folks from campuses that are on the line to get help from senior leaders to participate in this kind of initiative?
Well, there's several ways to answer that. I think often, in fact, this is on many campuses prompted by students. Students are some of our best advocates and have really strong voices about environmental issues. And often I think enlisting the support, enlisting the voices of students is very effective on many campuses. I also think that probably on every single campus, there are faculty champions or a staff champion that that I would suggest, if they don't think their leaders or their president or chancellor are really as involved as they should be, to request to have a conversation about it. This is, to me, a no-brainer. And when I talk to my colleagues in the Cal State system, you know, everybody is on board. We believe that this is something that is, it's not just good business. And that is another issue that can persuade in a very compelling manner presidents or chancellors. We can save money. We can save resources. That works for a lot of people. And I think the leadership roles now are so important. And I do think, following what Marty said, the momentum is so strong right now that in the face of, anti-science, someone who's leading a university should be a natural leader for a science-based approach to what we're doing. And universities are labs in and of themselves, and perfect environments for testing, developing solutions, piloting different approaches and strategies, and students enjoy it, faculty enjoy it, the community is very helpful and supportive, and I almost have a hard time understanding why someone wouldn't take this on.
Tim, do you have anything to add to that before I ask?
Yeah, just real quick. I think maybe some people in the call, you might not have direct access to your senior leader, or maybe an intimidating proposition, or maybe there's, only so many asks you can make. And so and part of the network, we can help serve as a bridge to your senior leadership. And so feel free to reach out to us. And as someone who's made a commitment, we can directly be in touch with senior leaders, and folks like Diane and other steering committee are more than happy to reach out as peers to your senior leader as well.
Absolutely.
So this next question is sort of a different cohort. Tim, I'm going to send this one over to you first. How would you recommend that institutions lead these cross-sectoral WASI initiatives, actions in their local community?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is to think about what connections you already have and see what is missing. I think one good example of this is maybe within a month after WASI has been launched, Millersville, Chris Stoyer reached out to us and said, there's a great group here in Pennsylvania that's really interested in being, basically a statewide version of climate action. And we already have really strong connections to a variety of schools that are part of the statement. We may not have as strong of connection to some of the other entities that are part of the group. And could you help us think through what that looks like for Pennsylvania? And I think that was a first assessment of where are we, who do we know, what do we already have in place, and can kind of the WASI leadership serve as an accelerator and a facilitator for those connections they already have. There's, like Marty said, there's thousands of businesses that are really small, and some of them actually might be based in your region or area, and you may not even know about it. We can help with that. A starting plate is kind of do an assessment, identify some gaps. If you really want to take on the initiative, think through what are the barriers right now to climate progress. The city of Atlanta, recently passed a 100% renewable energy goal. How many businesses and campuses are a part of that? It's not really clear, but in some cases, these cities are writing some checks that they're not exactly sure how they're going to cash, and WASI can help with the implementation and actions that would be aligned for everybody. So both through existing relationships and maybe some public, either policies or proclamations that have already been made, that could be a good starting point for the next steps locally. We're not going to know your local conditions as well as you are. So I think we really just want to be responsive to where those emergent needs are, whether it's California or Pennsylvania or Indiana.
Marty, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, sure. Just a brief addition. Tim gave a great answer, and I'd say in the aggregate, we'll be able to share. Our hope is to share names across the network, so that when we identify, well, who's in this particular area, that you can find who else has signed the "We Are Still In" statement, and then for you won't need to ask permission to do things locally, and you wouldn't have to cover everything, right? Whatever the issue is that's important. Is it renewable energy? Is it energy efficiency? Is it resilience? It will be, it's not going to be managed from the top. It's going to be about what matters most to the players and people in those places. And that's how I think that's how it'll thrive. And it will make the most sense for you not have to wait permission and say, can I do this? It'll be mostly like, oh, let's try to pull something together to demonstrate how we're working in this community to solve the climate challenge together. And that joint activity is what's helping to mainstream ambitious climate action. When Americans look out and see that the places and institutions they know and trust the most are all embracing this, we are building a new culture that allows that to thrive. And that's kind of our underlying mission.
Thanks, Marty.
One more thing.
Go ahead.
Real quick. I mean, and this is not to layer on an additional thing for you to do. So there really is for you to think about how could I do, because I maybe have goals I have on campus I hadn't really been able to accomplish on my own. Now these other sectors are involved. Maybe I can actually get these things done and can have some help along the way doing it because we're part of this broader group.
That's great. And that answered one of the questions that we have is how will this initiative help connect folks with local leadership from other sectors? Sorry, Marty, go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I mean, we're figuring out the exact mechanics of that. I mean, anyone can go on the website and see the names of the institutions that have already signed, and we've only broken them out by sector, but these are long lists. So the hope is that what we'll be able to do is identify and start to share and say, okay, there's a network of folks in your area, you want to try to, and we'll try to help facilitate those connections.
Great. So another question, and maybe it's just at this particular time, it's a wee bit discouraging, I think, especially for those of us living in and around Washington, D.C. But you know, this is an incredible coming together of all of these subnational actors, and I'd be curious as to what each of your perspectives are on what realistically do you expect the long-term impact of this initiative to be?
Do you want me? I can take it.
Go ahead, Tim.
I can start. I mean, in some ways, like we were saying, this is an extension of past work, but it really could be a bit of a transformative moment for the way the sectors continue to work together. So it's an initiative that's really an infrastructure initiative, a relational initiative, as much as it is, you know, producing large solar fields somewhere. It's more about how can the alignment on a topic like climate actually drive action in a way that wouldn't happen otherwise. This production network that we talked about at the beginning. That then sets up all sorts of opportunity for the future, whether it's general innovation, whether it's, you know, channeling student outcomes to directly align with, you know, city goals that might be there. This connection between campus and community, as far as a lasting impact, is going to be robust, not only on the climate front, but on a variety of other fronts, potentially, and hopefully.
Marty or Diane?
Well, I was just going to add, I think really following up with what Tim is talking about, it's an opportunity for that long-term partnering that we all need to be doing with a number of other sectors in our communities. We have lots of work to do. We all know that, and we're not going to be able to do it by ourselves. So this, to me, provides incredible, not just motivation, but excitement at the prospect of the kinds and strengths of partnerships and connections that we will have in unison with businesses, with our elected officials, the city, the state, and so forth. I think that the long-term prospects are quite good, and I will add that you know, we've been motivated by the present administration, and that motivation is playing itself out in many, many ways. And this is one way, and this is a very strong way.
Yeah, this is, you know, at my most optimistic, I can't help thinking this is transformative. It's transformative in the U.S. because and we've never seen as many people and organizations, mainstream ones, embrace ambitious climate action. Ambitious climate action meaning what it's going to take us to be well below 2 degrees. Issue within that year, and we need to do a lot more of it, and we need a lot more players. So for those of you who are trying to convince your leadership to engage, showcasing that the biggest brand companies in America are embracing these strategies, and they're doing it for business reasons, not just because they want to be good actors, can be helpful. The other two things I think that are going to be critical, we didn't really talk about yet today, is from an action platform standpoint, there's going to be pivoting engagement around policy activities that could be either local, national, one day again in the future, and of course, internationally. Get together to push for solutions at a local level across sectorally, which will also be innovative.
Great. Well, I know we're just at the hour here, so I want to thank each of our presenters for their time and insights today. I do want to remind folks that We Are Still In is still taking signatories to the initiative. You can go to the We Are Still In page, and there are instructions there for businesses, local governments, state governments to sign up through one portal, and then Second Nature is collecting the higher ed signatures, and the instructions are on We Are Still In, the We Are Still In webpage. And this webinar will be recorded and posted. And thanks again to all of you for participating today, but more than that, for your commitment to climate leadership. We're very appreciative, and I hope that you have a good weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.